Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are absolutely diving headfirst into the saga of what is, without a doubt, the world's most epic, mind-boggling architectural obsession, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. If you're fascinated by structures that just completely shatter the limits of human imagination and engineering, you are in the exact right place. We're going to explore how one man's grand vision morphed into a multi-generational crusade that is literally still making headlines today. To really wrap your head around the sheer, absurd scale of this endeavor, consider this staggering figure. When the legendary Catalan architect Antoni Gaudí died back in 1926, after pouring over 4 decades of relentless, obsessive work into this building, his crowning achievement was barely a quarter finished. We're talking an estimated 15 to 25% complete. I mean, can you imagine dedicating your entire life to a project knowing full well you'd barely see a fraction of it actually realized? Gaudí, though, he wasn't bothered by this timeline at all. He famously used to say, "My client is not in a hurry." He literally saw God as his client, and honestly, that perfectly establishes the absurd, divine scale of the timeline we're looking at here. He wasn't building for his generation, he was building for eternity. Section 1. Gaudí's Radical Redesign. Okay, let's dive into this, because the Sagrada Familia didn't actually start out as a mad genius's lifelong crusade. It began as something completely different. The project originally broke ground in 1882 under an architect named Francisco de Paula del Villar, whose plan was basically a standard, by-the-books Gothic revival church. But when Gaudí took over in 1883, he radically ditched those standard plans. Instead, he injected his own unprecedented style, fusing Gothic elements with sweeping, curvilinear Art Nouveau forms. He famously abandoned exact right angles altogether. Seriously, you'll find almost zero straight lines anywhere in his design. So, the crucial point is how this radical redesign translates to the interior. Gaudí didn't just want to build a church, he wanted to build a massive geometric stone forest. The central nave vaults reach a dizzying 45 meters high. But notice how the columns branch out near the ceiling to support the massive load, perfectly mimicking natural trees. This isn't just for looks either. It relies on incredibly complex mathematics, utilizing a 3D intersection of helicoidal or twisting columns. A single column might start with a square base, evolve into an octagon, morph into a 16-sided form, and finally become a perfect circle at the top. It's structural biomimicry from way before that term even existed. Section 2. Tragedy, war, and delays. Now, a vision this wild was bound to hit some devastating roadblocks. Let's walk through this rather chaotic timeline. You've got the 1882 groundbreaking, followed by Gaudí's tragic death in 1926. But the real catastrophe hit a decade later in 1936, during the Spanish Civil War. Anarchists broke into the site, set fire to the crypt, and torched Gaudí's original workshop, devastating his plans and plaster models. For a long moment, it seemed like the whole vision was lost forever. Fast forward through decades of grueling reconstruction, and we hit 2010, when Pope Benedict XVI consecrated it as a basilica, which brings us toward the highly anticipated milestones of 2026. But really, how on earth did they recover from that 1936 fire? Well, it took a massive technological leap. First, Gaudí's disciples painstakingly pieced together his ruined models from surviving photos and plans. Then, starting in the 1980s, the project fully embraced the digital age. Computer-aided design software stepped in to decode Gaudí's insanely complex geometries. Today, the slow hand-carving has largely been replaced by high-tech CNC milling machines, shaping the stone off-site. They even use advanced post-tension stone panels that are completely pre-assembled before being hoisted into place, which has massively accelerated the whole process. Section 3. Decoding the grand façades. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the building's exterior tells these distinct, competing visual narratives. On the east, we have the lush, life-affirming nativity facade. Completed before 1936, this has Gaudí's direct fingerprints all over it. It faces the rising sun, symbolizing the birth of Jesus, and is just bursting with ornate naturalism. Columns resting on turtles for unchanging time, and chameleons for change. But flip to the west, and bam, you are hit by the Passion facade. Sculpted mostly by Josep Maria Subirach starting in the 80s, it's incredibly controversial. Facing the setting sun to represent death, it is aggressively austere, using harsh, angular lines to resemble a bare skeleton, depicting the crucifixion with this striking, rigid brutality. And then we have the third and largest of them all, the incomplete Southern Glory facade. Begun in 2002, this will eventually be the main entrance. It represents the ascension to God, featuring intense sculptural depictions of death, final judgment, and hell itself, complete with demons, false gods, and the 7 deadly sins. And the scale is just massive. The doors to this facade actually feature the text of the Lord's Prayer in Catalan, surrounded by the phrase, "Give us this day our daily bread," inscribed in 50 different languages. As you might guess, with designs this eccentric, the public reception has been intensely polarizing. The famous author George Orwell took one look at it in 1938 and plainly stated it was one of the most hideous buildings in the world. Yet, immediately contrast Orwell's intense hatred with the revered American architect Louis Sullivan. He was in absolute awe, calling it the greatest piece of creative architecture in the last 25 years. It is spirit, symbolized in stone. That right there perfectly captures the essence of the Sagrada Familia. It's a building that forces a reaction, whether that's absolute sheer wonder or utter disdain. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer physical dominance of the building on a global scale. In late 2025, it finally surpassed Germany's Minster to become the tallest church building in the entire world. The central spire, the Tower of Jesus Christ, tops out at a massive 172.5 meters. But here's the kicker. Gaudí intentionally designed his record-breaking spire to be exactly 1 meter shorter than Barcelona's Montjuic Hill. Why? Because he firmly believed that his man-made creation should never surpass the height of God's natural work. Section 4. The final controversies. Okay, we're finally entering the modern era, but even as this 144-year saga nears the finish line, it remains completely steeped in absurdity and conflict. 36 million euros. That is the massive fee the trustees had to pay the city of Barcelona back in 2018. Why, you ask? Because it turned out that for 136 years, this world-famous basilica had been under construction without an official building permit. It was literally illegal construction for over a century, relying purely on private donations and tourist ticket sales before they finally secured that permit in 2019. Unbelievable, right? Let's walk through the recent historical milestones. February 20, 2026 marks the ultimate structural completion of the Tower of Jesus Christ, making it officially the tallest church in the world. Then, on June 10, 2026, coinciding perfectly with the centennial of Gaudí's death, Pope Leo XIV visited to bless and inaugurate the completed tower. But while the main structure is done, the whole shebang isn't totally over. The interior of the spire is expected by 2028, and the final decorative elements are going to stretch out until 2030 or 2032. But there is one final, massive, real-world hurdle looming, and I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Will completing a masterpiece justify the demolition of 3,000 homes? Remember that glory facade we talked about? To finish Gaudí's planned grand entrance, which includes a massive 57-meter stairway over the street, the current city layout requires bulldozing entire blocks of housing and businesses. The foundation argues it's all part of the original legal urban planning from 1976. Meanwhile, local residents are desperately fighting it in the middle of a severe housing crisis. It's a profound dilemma. So at what point does the cost of architectural immortality become just too high for the living city around it? Thank you so much for exploring the awe-inspiring, chaotic, and brilliant Sagrada Familia with me in this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.